He is Director of Municipal Policy at the Show Me Institute. Good morning, Patrick Toohey.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Let's see how much trouble we can get in today. The convention center, they announced, last week that the convention center in St. Louis that no longer houses the Rams needs to go through a massive renovation to keep up with some of the other convention centers. They're already losing business, and it's an arms race, and St. Louis has got to be in it to win it, and so they want a $175 million renovation, and I'm feeling you have a thought or two on that.
Yeah, and I am sympathetic or empathetic with your listeners who hear the Show Me Institute and maybe my name and think, oh, here this guy is just going to say no to something else. And I get that. But the role of government is important. What we pay our taxes for is absolutely important, and it ought to be focused on the few things that government does. I won't say does well, but the few things that only government can do. And the city of St. Louis does not need to own and operate a convention center. It's just not a basic function of government. They don't do it well. And the idea that as cities around the country are falling prey to this argument that they need to expand and build new convention centers and convention hotels, that St. Louis is somehow going to leapfrog over Vegas or Chicago or Florida, parts of Florida. It's just a fallacy. But they buy into this argument, and St. Louis has had a particularly checkered history with convention spending, and this is more of the same, unfortunately.
Granted, but Las Vegas, Chicago, Florida, all subsidize their convention business. So the argument
that doesn't make it a good argument. I don't know that St. Louis has the funds to spare on out-of-town partiers.
Yeah, but I agree with you in principle, and it makes a lot of sense. So what should happen to the convention center?
So consider this, for example. In 2014, the St. Louis Convention Visitor Center hosted 393 events. Only 14 of those events had more than 2,000 attendees. So, the Chase Park Plaza in Central West End has event space that can hold 2,500 people. There are plenty of hotels in St. Louis that can host 96% of these conventions. The idea that the city needs to spend tens of millions of dollars on convention space because somehow there isn't enough capacity elsewhere just isn't true. So, maybe the city ought to look at divesting itself of these convention centers. After all, if this is such a big market, if this is such a boon, then the private sector should be more than able to handle it, and these properties should be valuable. But I don't think that you can argue at the same time that there is a lot of unmet market demand and the taxpayers need to subsidize it. Those things don't go together.
What do we care that the taxpayers who have rental cars, that's where the money's coming from, the rental cars, what do we care that the out-of-towners who rent cars are paying this tax?
Well, I appreciate that, but ultimately St. Louis, and I'm in Kansas City, we've been making this argument to ourselves for 50 years, that if we just build and expand, we'll somehow increase our convention business. It's never happened here. It hasn't happened in St. Louis. I think, ironically, when you jack up hotel taxes, restaurant district taxes, rental car taxes, you end up making yourself a lot less attractive to conventions. And so what these convention centers end up doing is rebating a lot of money in fees and whatever back to the conventions that they're hosting. So you end up with zero sum or worse, and it's just a scam. I think a lot of these city employees spend a lot of time arguing about how their service, we need to hold conventions, all this stuff, because it helps their particular budgets, but it doesn't accrue any benefit to the taxpayers of the city.
Hasn't
hotels, the private hotels can handle this.
Yeah. Hasn't convention spending by businesses, isn't that down significantly over the last 10, 15, 20 years?
So it dropped an awful lot, as you can imagine, after 2001. It has picked up in the last few years. But almost every city is making these same arguments that St. Louis and, frankly, Kansas City are making, which is we need to get into this market. And it just isn't it isn't working. Convention attendee isn't dramatically up. Maybe it's catching up to where it was at the beginning of the 2000s, but it's not a growth market.
Yeah.
And jacking up taxes in order to attract conventions doesn't make yourself more appealing. Doesn't increase your competitive advantage. I think frankly, we should let the private sector take care of this.
Yeah, I agree with you in theory, and you're in Kansas City, and your football team is at 5-0. Our old football team is also 5-0, but they're building a stadium in Los Angeles because we fought tooth and nail. One of the reasons, not the only reason, but we fought tooth and nail not to give them one more nickel to build another stadium. And so, great, we stayed to our principles, and we didn't build them a stadium, and now they're 5-0 in another town. So, I mean, it's one of those. I agree with you in theory, but St. Louis doesn't have a football team because of it.
Well, he's building the stadium by himself in Los Angeles. He didn't get the subsidy there. That tells me he probably wanted to move to Los Angeles regardless.
True.
I don't think it was a matter of getting a better deal in Los Angeles. I think he just wanted to move. But the question you have to ask yourself is St. Louis going to do the right thing, or is it going to get in line with all these other areas for more bad ideas? Because that's the game they play, whether it's conventions or stadiums or anything else, Amazon or Boeing. These big businesses show a little bit of leg and say to the localities, what are you going to do to win us over? And these localities fall over themselves to throw money at them. And it's a game that municipalities are losing. We
should also note that didn't Arrowhead Stadium go through a massive renovation with taxpayer dollars in the not too distant future or not too distant past?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We paid a whole bunch of money to renovate the stadiums, and again, we're spending money on billionaires so that they don't have to do it themselves.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
It's a tough call, and I get it, and I agree with you. I wish there was a way where we could mutually disarm together. It's like a politician who says, you know what, I'm not going to run these negative ads because it's wrong. And then everybody else runs negative ads against him and he loses. And he's like, okay, well, if I would have run the negative ads, I would have had a shot, but you can't mutually disarm by yourself.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Within Missouri and among the states, we need to come to some agreement because we're all being played for fools. Yeah.
Patrick Tuohy with us each and every Monday. The Show Me Institute is Director of Municipal Policy with the Show Me Institute. More online at showme.org. Is that right, Patrick?
That is right. Thank you so much.
Showme.org. Thanks, Patrick. Have a good day.